There's a specific kind of person. They wake up before everyone else, not because they have to, but because something pulls them. They check the weather, not to prepare, but to decide. And when conditions aren't perfect, they go anyway. You probably know someone like this, or maybe you are this person. Here's what nobody tells you. This isn't really about motorcycles. It never was. The motorcycle is just the object, the thing you can point to, touch, talk about in a parking lot with strangers. But what's actually happening, what's really driving the behavior, lies somewhere much deeper. It lives in the architecture of how certain people are wired to experience the world. And that's what this video is about. Because when you study the psychology of people who push limits, whether it's on a bike or in their careers or in their relationships, you start to notice something unsettling. Something that explains a lot about why they do what they do, and why, even when they know the risks, they can't stop. Here's something that's rarely talked about. When someone truly commits to riding, not as a hobby, but as a practice, it begins to rewire the architecture of their thinking. Most people move through the world in a kind of passive drift. Things happen. They react. Life is something that happens to them, but riding at the edge of your ability, really pushing, forces you into a completely different mode of perception. You cannot drift. The moment your attention slips, the physical world reminds you immediately. There's no delay, no buffer. And over time, that changes how the brain processes everything. Not just the road, not just the machine beneath you, everything. Decision-making becomes faster. Risk becomes something you can read instead of something that simply arrives. Your perception of space, of time, of your own body, it all sharpens in ways that are hard to describe to someone who's never felt it. Psychologists studying what's called flow states, those moments of total immersion where skill and challenge perfectly meet, have found that they don't just feel good. They restructure how the mind works. They become something the brain wants to return to. And for a certain kind of person, that place is found most reliably on two wheels. Let's go a little deeper. There's a concept in psychology called locus of control. Simply put, do you believe that what happens in your life is the result of your actions or of forces outside your control? People with a high internal locus of control don't just believe they're capable. They require environments where that belief can be tested, where the outcome is genuinely tied to their choices, where there's no algorithm, no committee, no luck smoothing things over. A motorcycle at speed is one of the purest tests of that. You made every decision that led you here. You're making decisions now. The outcome belongs entirely to you. For this type of person, that's not terrifying, that's relief. Then there's the research on decision-making under risk. Most people, when faced with uncertainty, freeze, defer, or avoid, but a subset of the population, and it's well documented, performs better under pressure. Their cognitive function actually improves. Clarity increases. Emotion quiets. These aren't reckless people. They're not thrill seekers in the shallow sense. In many cases, they're more deliberate than average, not less. And then there's attentional control, the ability to direct and sustain focus intentionally. Studies on high-performance riders consistently show something fascinating. Their brains don't just react to danger, they anticipate it. They build mental models of the environment several seconds ahead. They're playing a different game than the average person on the road. That capacity once developed doesn't stay on the bike. It follows them everywhere. Over time, something forms. Not a reckless person, not someone who doesn't care about consequences. Quite the opposite. What forms is someone with an unusual tolerance for uncertainty and a deep earned confidence in their ability to navigate it. Not arrogance, not bravado. Something quieter than that. Something that was tested repeatedly and didn't break. They tend to be intensely independent. Not because they're antisocial, but because they've learned that certain things can only be figured out alone in motion with no one to ask. They have a higher than average comfort with being wrong because in riding, being wrong has immediate feedback. You correct or you crash. There's no hiding from it. And paradoxically, that honesty, that inability to avoid the truth of your own mistakes, builds a kind of psychological resilience that's hard to find elsewhere. They don't need applause. They don't need validation. They know what they did and what it cost. That kind of person doesn't disappear when they take off the helmet. But there's something else. Something harder to quantify. There are certain roads you never forget. Not because something dramatic happened, but because for a few minutes, maybe longer, you were completely, entirely present. Not thinking about what you said yesterday. Not worried about what happens next month. Just here. In this exact moment. In this specific light. And in a world that is increasingly designed to fragment your attention, to pull you in 20 directions at once, to keep you consuming and scrolling and anxious. That kind of presence feels almost radical. For many riders, that's the real reason. Not the speed, not the performance, the presence. The motorcycle becomes a kind of anchor to their own identity, a thread back to something real about themselves. Something that existed before the job title, before the expectations, before the version of themselves they perform for the world. On the road, there's no performance. There's only what you actually are. And that brings us to something that goes far beyond riding. Because what we're really describing is a philosophy, a way of engaging with a world that is, at its core, chaotic and uncertain. A world where control is largely an illusion, except in those moments when you take it. When you accept the risk, understand it, prepare for it, and move forward anyway. Most people spend enormous energy trying to eliminate uncertainty from their lives. They want guarantees, they want comfort, they want to know how it ends before it begins, and there's nothing wrong with that. It's a very human impulse. But there is another way of moving through the world, one that doesn't deny the chaos but learns to dance with it. One that finds clarity not in safety but in the discipline of facing something real and coming out the other side more capable than before. That's what's underneath this. That's the uncomfortable truth. Some people push limits not because they don't value their life, but because they've found the only version of themselves they truly respect. In the exact moment when everything is on the line. If you've made it this far and something here resonated, not because you ride, but because you recognized yourself in it, then you already know what kind of channel this is. This isn't about motorcycles, it's about the psychology underneath extreme choices. About what drives certain people to live the way they live. About the patterns that most people never stop long enough to examine. If that's the conversation you want to keep having, subscribe. Because this is exactly what we're here to explore. Here's what I want to leave you with. Every person has a version of the road in their life. A context where the noise disappears, where the stakes are real, where you discover what you're actually made of. For some, it's a motorcycle. For others, it's something completely different. But the question is the same for all of us. Are you living in a way that ever puts you in that place? Or have you built a life so insulated, so safe, so managed, that you've never really had to find out who you are when everything depends on the next decision? The limits some people push aren't the problem. The absence of anything worth pushing against, that might be. So I want to ask you something, and I mean it seriously. What's the version of the road in your life? The place or situation where you stop performing and start being completely real. And when was the last time you were actually there? Leave it in the comments. I read all of them.